On the DJI Avata and the DJI Avata 2, there are 3 different flying modes: normal mode, sport mode, and manual mode. But which one should you use? In this video, I'm going to be going through the key differences between those 3 modes, what each one allows you to do or restricts you from doing, where I'd recommend using them if ever, and finally there's a small modification that you need to do to your FPV controller if you do decide to use one of these modes. 2 of the 3 modes that we're going to be going through are available on the motion controller. However, this video is mainly for those of you who've gone out and bought the FPV controller and want to take full advantage of your Avata's capabilities. So let's begin with normal mode. This is the easiest mode to understand and the easiest to use. However, it is by no means just for beginners. Normal mode will give you an average speed of around 6 meters per second, as long as there's no wind. And when it comes to using an FPV controller, the Avata will act very similarly to how a Mavic does, with altitude and yaw on the left stick and forwards and sidewards on the right stick. But one of the biggest differences for the Avata when it's in normal mode is that when you move the left stick to the left or right to rotate the drone to the left or the right, the Avata will also tilt slightly as it turns. This is to mimic what a traditional FPV drone would do if you was flying in acro mode or manual mode on the Avata. All of that will become clear shortly. The camera will also stay facing forwards unless you adjust the camera angle yourself on the controller. And the camera's gimbal will be used to smooth out some of the lumps and bumps in the footage. However, most of the stabilization comes from electronic stabilization, which is provided afterwards once you've done the recording. But obviously all still within inside the drone. Normal mode is great, especially if you're new to flying FPV drones in general. If you want to get into the air quickly and confidently, this is the mode to use. But also if you're doing something a little bit more complicated in some enclosed space, then maybe this is the preferred option to go for. In normal mode, the drone will move its slowest, it will react the slowest. And if you ever start to lose control, you can let go of the control sticks and the Avata will just hover for you, the same as a Mavic. Now, if you do decide to use a motion controller, with the Avata 2, you have a huge advantage. As long as you have all your firmware up to date, you will now have access to Easy Acro. And Easy Acro will allow you to spin, drift, and flip the Avata 2 really easily just using this controller, and without the risk of crashing it. It'll even prevent you from doing anything too silly if you're too close to the ground, thanks to its upgraded sensors. Moving on to sport mode. Sport mode is very similar to normal mode, however you have an increased speed up to 9 meters per second now rather than 6. However, the Easy Acro feature, which we've just mentioned on the motion controller, isn't accessible when you're in sport mode, even with this controller. Easy Acro is just available in normal mode. Again, for most people who are inexperienced with flying FPV but want to experience the full speed of the Avata 2, sport mode may be the way to go. Sport mode is a lot more sensitive and a lot more reactive to any inputs that you give it. So anytime you're using it, just be cautious about what you do. However, just like normal mode, if you start to lose control, just let go of the control sticks and the Avata 2 will just hover for you. Now, when it comes to manual mode, there's a few vital things that you need to do to the drone and the controller to make sure that you can use the mode properly. But I'll go through these in just a second. Manual mode will allow you to unlock the full potential of flying the Avata 2 and get you ready for any FPV drone that you may purchase in the future if you wish. With manual mode, you have the ability to dive through gaps, flip the drone in any direction as fast or as slow as you wish, and pretty much pull off any maneuver that you can think of and more, but only as long as you practice. And if I was starting to fly FPV drones again, yes, I would start with normal and sport mode, but I would definitely work towards using manual mode no matter what. With normal mode, the camera angle that you set for your drone remains consistent even when you're flying. When you select manual mode on the controller, you'll sometimes see the camera angle just move slightly up. This is because when you're flying, your camera doesn't actually change its angle. If you're wanting to tilt the camera down as you're flying, then your drone needs to tilt forward. But by doing that, your drone's gonna naturally move forward through the air. And generally speaking, the more camera angle that you have, the more the drone has to tilt forward. The more the drone tilts forward, the faster your drone is gonna go. You also have something called rates that come into effect when you're using manual mode. And these rates determine how sensitive or how smooth you can make your flying experience. One of the biggest things you have to remember when flying manual mode with the Avata 2 is if you start to lose control, you can't just let go of the control sticks and make it hover like you can in sport mode or normal mode. What you have to do instead is press the pause button on the controller, because that will take over and make it hover for you. Whatever you do, don't forget that tip. But before you decide to flick this into manual mode and get the drone in the air, you're gonna have to change a few settings on the Avata 2 and also make a small modification to this. Let's begin with the drone. With the drone and the rest of the hardware turned on, press the joystick down on the goggles and go to settings, then control, and then remote controller. On the FPV controller, you have this switch on the back which goes from normal to sport to manual mode. However, as the Avata 2 comes from the factory, the bottom option is still actually sport mode, so let's change that custom button to be manual mode. The next setting we're going to change is almost like taking the stabilizers off your training bike when you was a kid. With the settings we currently have, your drone will still not flip a full 360 degrees like you may want it to. If you're wanting your Avata 2 to spin and flip however you wish, you need to go to gain and expo, and then go down to altitude limit and toggle it to off. But remember, only do this if you feel comfortable in having full control over your drone. And please, if you're new to manual mode, go easy when you're flying it for the first few attempts, and don't go writing in the comments saying you've broken your drone, because I'd feel so guilty. Now you need to turn everything off and make a small modification to the FPV controller. At the moment, your left control stick will want to stay in the center. If you move it anywhere at all, it'll just spring back to center. But if you're flying in manual mode, really you want the up and down motion of the left control stick to be completely floppy. To change this, what you need to do is remove the rubber on the back of the controller. Once you've peeled it back, you'll see two screw holes labeled F1 and F2. You're gonna need a small Allen key to do this, but tighten the F2 screw until the control stick starts to feel really loose. Then you want to tighten F1 until your control stick wants to stay near the bottom or the top, pretty much wherever you decide to put it. But make sure you don't go too far because it can make the control stick feel a lot stiffer. And if there's a little bit of bounce in the stick when you're at the very bottom or the very top, don't worry about it. You'll never feel it when it comes to flying. But once you're done, your controller should look like this. Once you've done that, put the rubber back and you're good to go. Now the controls for manual mode will be ever so slightly different to what they were in normal or sport mode. The throttle will act very differently and your drone won't naturally hover if you get into a sticky situation. Put it this way, you will probably crash it within the first few seconds of trying it for the very first time. So what you really need to do now is watch this video right here where I explain exactly what you need to do to fly properly in manual mode. I'll see you soon.